Welcome everyone to Grandmaster's Choice. I am woman Grandmaster Thalia Cervantes, once again teaching this class. And for the past few weeks we have kind of focused on, what have we actually focused on? My brain is blanking out. Yeah, we focus on commitment to a move, and then how we make decisions in chess, how sacrifices work, and things like that. And today's topic is kind of similar to that. It's related still to the idea of attacking chess and such. Maybe some of you got the hint of it because of the Morphy picture. But in general, I want to focus today on the importance of time versus material. Like, I feel like that's an interesting topic, and in general, how one can lead an attack based on the fact that the opponent hasn't completed developments, right? Like how to punish the opponent and the opponents when they haven't actually finished with the development, and then they're supposed to defend, but at the same time they have all of the pieces occupied on the other side of the board. So overall, I would say that there are a lot of examples of this, and it's kind of one of the first things that we talk about. We're getting into chess, how you want to develop all of your pieces, have them active, have them coordinated. But a lot of times, either because we want to be the exception of the rule, or because I guess, you know, we just kind of think that there's not going to be a big consequence. We end up forgetting about development or the actual coordination of the pieces. And these games are kind of an example of what happens when you don't take that into consideration. So to start off, I have an example of a game that I played back in July of last year. It was, maybe I've mentioned it before, but it was a very memorable summer for me. I really enjoyed myself. I played tournaments throughout Europe. And this is from the very nice tournament, Benasque Open in Spain. And it's one of the games that I was very proud of from the whole event. So the game actually started out with d4. I was playing with the white pieces. My opponent played knight f6, c4, d6, knight f3, g6. So far, so good. It looked like we were heading into a King's Indian. I played knight to c3, and my idea was to face bishop g7 with e4. But my opponent ended up playing this very interesting move that I had never seen before, bishop to f5. Obviously, the idea is to not just develop the bishop, but at the same time get some control over the e4 square, right? And prevent me from playing e4 and controlling space in the center. It's not necessarily a great move. There are many different ways to counteract it. One of them, for example, is queen to b3, putting pressure onto the b7 pawn now that the bishop is gone from c8. And even, for example, I saw some ideas of knight to g5, so that in the future we can get enough control of e4 and then play it. However, at the time of the game, I wasn't thinking too hard about the position. I was just kind of going with the flow, and I decided to play with g3 so that I can in the future bring my bishop to g2, castle, and then in the long run I want this bishop on g2 to look over the diagonal, maybe the b7 pawn, or I could even have ideas of getting this knight out of the way with knight to h4 or knight to d2, and then playing e4. But my opponent went knight to e4 directly, and after takes bishop g2, bishop g7, castles. I started thinking, right, because my position, it's not 100% clear. Like, for example, this bishop could get annoying in some future, right, especially if black decides to play with something like knight to d7 and c5, maybe putting pressure into this diagonal. And this bishop right here also has a very dominant position, right? I can't really move my knight from f3 because then a bishop trade would happen, and I'm not exactly sure if that would benefit me, right? Because I want to keep pieces on the board. I'm playing a lower rated opponent too, so I just want to keep activity in the position. And in general, it was just kind of a critical moment, right? Where I need to think and figure out where I want my pieces and how I can you know, head into the middle game with a plan. So I want to ask you guys like what to think of in this position, or like possible moves for white. But one thing that I want to emphasize that I noticed as I was thinking was the fact that the kind of like the key piece missing in this position is the defensive knight of the black king, right? Like there's no knight on f6 just yet, and at the same time, the fact that there's no knight here not only means that maybe I could have some ideas around the king in the future, but also there's no knight on f6 that has control over e4, right? So I need to find a way to utilize that. And the move that I came up with was queen to d2. This move is kind of interesting. You see it a lot of times, I would say, in Queen's Indian positions, because you want the queen going to d2, and then there are some ideas of bringing it over to e3 or f4, right? And that was kind of my plan here. I want to bring my queen over to f4, put some pressure onto this bishop, and then if my opponent allows me to play e4, control the center, and then expand my position. At the same time, with the idea of queen to f4, I can also in the future, as you're probably going to see, I can bring my queen over to h4, and if I manage to bring my queen over to h4, then I have bishop h6, knight g5 ideas. So overall, I just wanted to seize the initiative quickly before my opponent had the chance to fully develop. And you might be thinking, wow, this is such a strange move because you're putting the queen right in front of the bishop. The bishop has not developed just yet. I thought you were going to talk about the importance of development in this class. This is a scam. But in reality, this bishop right here doesn't have a key square to move to just yet. And there's no special need for it to commit to a move just now, right, with the bishop. Because I could bring my bishop over to f4 or to g5. Maybe bishop g5 was an acceptable move in this position. Bishop to f4 is okay, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense because there's no clear threat, right? Like the bishop is just sitting there just because, but it doesn't have an actual target. So my bishop on c1 doesn't need to move just yet. We do see that it has a long diagonal, and I can set up my pieces before I decide to move that bishop. On the other hand, black needs to develop this knight, right? And as we know, knights tend to be a little bit slower to get to their desired square, right? So I thought that it would be completely fine. And then I would say that it's a little more critical for black to finish development than it is for me, just because the piece that I have not developed is the bishop. Meanwhile, this knight does need to get into the game, and probably the most recommended continuation is something like knight d7, knight f6. Probably knight c6 in some future is also possible, but for sure this knight needs to move, right? Foreshadowing for the future. But yes, I decided to continue with queen to d2. And here my opponent also started thinking, probably in reaction to such a strange move. He actually played a very interesting continuation, one that I had not considered too deeply, which is d5. And d5 is a very curious move, right? Because it's asking questions in the center, and I just created a momentarily awkward spot for my pieces with queen to d2, right? So it's really quickly asking questions, seizing the position, and it's not 100% clear what's going on, right? Especially because, as I mentioned, these two bishops can get very, very dangerous, right? Especially if I play something like, let's say, c takes d5, queen takes d5, then the position can become quite uncomfortable because if my queen moves too far away, then this pawn ends up hanging. This knight can develop to c6 with tempos, the rook can get into the center with tempos, this bishop's still in control of the diagonal. It's not clear where my pieces are going to go or if they even have a square, right? So what to do here? I decided to just play queen to f4 since, you know, we're talking about this idea anyways, and I still think it makes a lot of sense. Taking on f3 doesn't really pose as a problem. We can take either with the bishop or with the queen, and then the whole point is that we still have a lot of pressure onto this diagonal, right? Considering the fact that black just gave up their light square bishop too. So let's say if something like bishop takes d4, then we can play just like c takes d5, and it's a position where white has more space, and at the same time the pair of bishops, which, as we know, it can become very dominant for white. So f5 in this position, like after queen f4. The thing is that I don't understand what f5 would be for, because to me it just seems like it might be weakening the position a little bit, and I still have the idea of queen to h4. So I mean, I would say that a move like f5 might be giving me the chances that I want, right? Like in this position here, black doesn't have an immediate weakness that I can attack, so that's why it's so hard for me to make moves. But after f5, maybe queen h4. The thing is that if you play, whenever you play d takes c4, I have this knight g5 idea. And not only am I attacking h7, queen h7 mate, but at the same time e4 is very loose, right? So I can always play like takes, takes, takes. And there are just too many weaknesses going on in the position. Like sure, you can take on d4 if you want to, but I mean, I guess I also have ideas of bishop takes h6 or something like that. And all of a sudden, it's not so clear what to do. Like takes rook here, and then it just becomes a mess, I guess. But seem to be holding on. In general, I would say it just doesn't look very comfortable. Also, maybe takes works. 96 also an idea. Yeah, you're right. 96 also an idea. So again, like because you just played f5, like a lot of holes in the position now. So if there's really no need to move pawns around your own king, then I wouldn't recommend to do it. Okay. So yeah, actually queen to f4, and my opponent decided to play with queen to d6, queen to h4, and to avoid all of the knight g5 threats, because also he can't play h6 since I would take it, he decided to continue with h5. Bishop to f4. Whenever you can win a tempo with one of your while at the same time developing one of your pieces, it tends to be a good sign. And in this particular case, I managed to develop my last piece and at the same time attack this queen. And here is kind of the moment where things begin to go wrong for my opponent. He decided to play queen to b4, and if you just look at the position at face value, I already have a lot of pieces. In fact, majority of my pieces, if we exclude this rook on a1, I have all of my pieces already looking into the king side, right? And I already established that I want to play on the king side, I want to make weaknesses around the black king, and I want to have a breakthrough somehow, right? I'm also going to utilize the fact that my opponent just played h5. Maybe this can be a hook for me in the future. And my opponent just decided to bring the queen to the complete opposite side of the board, right? Which I'm not saying it's necessarily bad on its own, but it can become a problem, right? Like if all of a sudden the position opens up on the king side, this queen is going to be too far away. And as we were kind of talking in the previous lectures, another thing that I mentioned was that when you're looking at a position and you're wondering how to continue an attack or if the attack is going to work, if you have enough pieces on it, then you divide the board in half, like between the D and E file, and see how many pieces you have on that attacking side. And if we divide the board right here, then there are a lot of black pieces on the queen side, and it's not clear exactly what they're doing, right? Like the queen on b4, not sure where it's going. True, it does have some threads here and here, but it's nothing that we need to worry about. And at the same time, very importantly, the knight and the rook have not been developed, right? So what could be a good continuation here for white, utilizing the fact that the black pieces are uncoordinated and that we're going to start seizing the initiative now. I will say I was very proud of this 2-move sequence when I was at the board. A lot of people in the chat are very, very excited about the potential of G4. And I don't blame you. Like G4, for sure, it's very, very flashy, especially, after something like this takes a knight G5. Oh, you're chill about it. Okay. My bad. Yeah, G4 is very flashy. I think it might be possible. To play G4. Personally, I just wanted even less pieces around the black king, so I did something before playing G4. But why could this be a problem? Oh yes, I think that during the game I was calculating G4 right here, and I wasn't exactly sure what to do after. I think it was either queen takes c4 or queen b2. I think it was queen c4. Queen c4 and then takes and takes. And I wasn't super sure what to do because this is a problem. If the knight ever jumps, then queen h5 is coming. And if pawn takes, then, well, I guess you could take with the pawn too. Because if knight g5, queen h5 once again. Although, no, let's take with the pawn. And then I wasn't sure what to think of this because the position is opening up a little too much for my liking. And it's not like I'm just attacking my opponent. My opponent also has some counter threats, right? So I didn't want to commit to a position that may have some potential. Because like here, it could kind of go both sides. So exactly, it feels a little bit short of what I could have gotten. So first we need to destabilize the black position even more so that when we play g4, we are sure that everything is clear. Also, you're right, the opponent could take on f3 before taking on g4. Personally, I don't like the idea of giving up the pair of bishops, again, because I'm very biased towards them. But that could also be an escape route. So how do we destabilize the black position here? And I'll tell you, there are some tactics involved. So
well, I'm looking at knight to e5.
Knight to e5 makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I'm a little bit worried because, we want the knight to go to g5 in some future. And then maybe now, like if after something like takes, black is going to be fine. Because we want to keep pieces on the board to attack them. So yeah, maybe here black is off the hook. If we see that just about by evaluating the position right now, and taking a look at some of the main aspects from the black position, like we said, they have not finished with development because of this knight on this rook. The queen is on the opposite side of the board, and not only that, I want to emphasize the center too, right? The fact that there's only a pawn on d5, there's no stable center for black, right? And if there's no stable center, then that can become a target too, right? And if we manage to destabilize the center, combined with the fact that their pieces are uncoordinated, and that if we start an attack and there is no pieces available to come to the defense, that can become a very dangerous mix, right? So there's a way for white to actually seize the center and get a lot more space. And then eventually have that G4 idea. Yeah, situations will arise. Yeah, so some people in the chat are saying c takes d5. And honestly, I feel like this move also makes a lot of sense just in paper, right? Because the queen on b4 was attacking c4 and b2. And if we play c takes d5, we also take away the defender of the bishop that was on e4, right? Like, the bishop was very strongly placed here on e4, and it is perhaps the best piece that black has. So after we take, actually, not only do we destabilize the center, but at the same time, we take away the hook, I guess, or the reinforcer of the bishop on e4. So after bishop takes d5, we actually have a very beautiful move now to keep gaining space.
Oh, e4.
Yeah, e4, right? It's a very, very, I would say it's like a very particular tactic, right? Because after bishop takes e4.
Bishop to d2.
Yeah, bishop to d2, and there's no actual way. There is no actual way for the queen to move to a square that also defends this bishop on e4, right? So it's a very particular tactic, in my opinion, but it works out perfectly here. And again, it all has to do with the pieces being uncoordinated, right? Like, none of them have defenders, position is destabilized, and that's how we can keep on improving the position. So, right, e4, I played this move, and I was very proud of how my position was improving, because now not only do I have more development and my pieces are more active, but at the same time I have control of the center too, right? Yeah, so those people who saw it in the chat, very good. And now this bishop has to commit, right? Bishop to c4 was played, at least making a move with a tempo, right? Attacking my rook on f1. And maybe here I could have gone rook to e1, supporting the center a little bit more, but I just decided to go rook fc1, making sure that, you know, my rook is going to be on an open file, and maybe in the future I can have some tactics surrounding this bishop on c4. And I believe here is kind of the final mistake that my opponent did. And I'm just going to flip the position really quickly. Now we're on a side that looks not as promising. I want to flip the position very quickly and just kind of like, you know, do a very basic question of like, why would you play here with black? Like, what's your first instinct? Someone said queen takes h2. Maybe you mean queen takes b2. But someone is saying get the knight developed. That makes a lot of sense. There's no tactic or like anything too deep here. It's just kind of like, if you were playing with black here, what would you do? My first instinct is that I'm in a lot of trouble. Knight c6, first candidate, but I've got problems to solve. That's going to take me time. That is true. c5, first instinct. Trade a lot of stuff. Why everything's so loose? True. I mean, I feel like it's very natural in this position to just be like, okay, like things have not turned out the way that I want to, but at least let me get my knight out and figure it out later, right? Playing knight to c6 also comes with a tempo here on d4, so maybe, maybe it could be a good idea. To be fair, if you play knight to c6, there are obviously, you have to take into consideration what to do after d5. You have to take into consideration like bishop to e3. You have to figure out what to do after a3, right? So there's like a lot of different lines that you need to look at. But it does make sense to just finally develop the knight and then, deal with the problems later. My opponent, I think, still had not realized the danger that he was in, and I believe this is his final mistake. He played the move c6. I'm not entirely sure why that was an audible groan, for the move c6. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure what his plan was with this move. But maybe he just wanted to protect, the pawn, because at the end of the day, it was attacked by the bishop on f4. But this just kind of, makes my position a lot easier. So now how to continue as white?
Well, what about g4 at this point?
G4 at this point. It does look a lot better. Like it does look very promising, right? And even better when we were considering g4 a few moves ago, right? And I mean, I know a lot of people can be skeptical of like, oh, I'm also moving pawns around my own king. I am creating weaknesses for myself. But if you look at this position, like what pieces are coming to attack your white king, right? Like it's not so clear. And then at the same time, we have all of these pieces around, right? So there's no weaknesses, no weaknesses being created around the white king. We're just finding a way to break through the black defense, right? And in this particular position, the move a3 is quite possible. There are some ideas of queen e7 if the queen goes away, let's say to like b5, defending the bishop still, queen takes e7. But why even entertain the queen side? We can just play g4, right? I see a lot of, I am seeing a lot of interesting comments. Yeah, and then at the same time, the move c6 doesn't really have a threat, right? So it's not like we play g4 and then our opponent has some form of counterattack, right? So this move combined with the fact that none of the pieces are developed kind of, make a lot of sense. And to be honest, when I was playing this game, the playing hall was like huge, massive, but at the same time, there were like 500 participants, right? So it ended up being a very tight space, and there were no ACs. It was more like open windows throughout the place. And even though it was very cool because it's a tournament essentially in the mountains, the playing hall was really hot. So I was just like making a move. If it was very intuitive, I was just making a move and then walking around. So I played g4 like without even thinking because it looks pretty good. And then I started walking around to like drink some water or something. And I mean, there's really not much to consider. Like I said, it's very intuitive. It's just, it just works, right? And now there is no clear way to continue. I didn't mention it before because I didn't want to ruin the question of g4. But if queen takes b2, g4 is also possible, right? If you decide to be greedy and take this pawn, the queen on b2 is still not doing any favors for black. If bishop takes d4, then we also have rook a b1, and then the two bishops are hanging. f2 is protected by this queen, which is very nice. And there are no worries. So c6 was played, then g4, and my opponent played bishop to e2, but there's no actual threat, right? It's not like the previous scenario where this knight was under some sort of danger. G takes h5, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and then we got to this position and I was thinking, okay, my opponent just traded off their best piece, right? My knight, true, my knight was an attacker in the position, so it makes sense that my opponent wanted to eliminate it. But he just traded off his best piece, you know, kind of highlights a little bit and emphasizes back again how these two pieces are not developed. And at the same time, I have the pair of bishops, which I enjoy talking about a lot because they're very beautiful. And in this particular case, they're going to help my attack. Also, the G file is all of a sudden open, so there can always be ideas of either coming back with the queen or playing something like king h1 and rook g1. And basically, it all centers, again, around the fact that the black pieces are too far away to help, right? So my opponent decided to play bishop takes d4, and I just went to queen g3, going after this pawn. I would say that here it was just most of a calculation, just intuitively playing. King g7, because the pawn needs to be protected somehow. And here I'm realizing, okay, it is very nice that I have my queen involved, my two bishops, I have a strong pawn on h5, but I want to make sure that the rest of my pieces find a way to activity. And if I can bring my pieces into the game, while at the same time making an active move, right, that keeps making threats, then I'm going to do it. So what could I have done here? Actually, what did I do here? I would say queen to g5 makes a lot of sense because we want to get in through the dark squares too. But we can also put a lot of pressure already on the dark square bishop, right? King h1, rook g1 idea I think is very nice, but I don't want to give too many tempos to my opponent to play, again, knight d7, knight f6, right? So I want to be fast. h6 with the idea of bishop to e5 is also interesting, as was mentioned. But after, let's say, something like king to h7, it's not so clear, right? Because you can play bishop e5 if you want to. But at the same time, it's just not, like, I don't have to take it if I don't want to. Also, I'm not sure, but maybe queen takes b2 is another thing to consider, right? So, yeah. No need to close the position. I still have the threats of h takes g6, so I want to keep that alive too. How about this rook? Where do we bring it to? And again, every move comes with a threat, so yeah, because of tactics. That's why doing your tactics is good. Then you can make threatening moves.
Oh, right. So rook to d1 with the threat of rook takes bishop.
Exactly, yeah, rook to d1. And not only am I threatening rook takes d4 with, you know, bishop to e5 coming in, but at the same time, rook to d1 also works kind of as a prophylactic move because I am preventing knight to d7. You might be thinking, wow, knight to d7, now the e5 square is covered, so if rook takes d4, queen takes d4, then there is no bishop to e5. But there's another thing to consider, right? These two pieces are lined up on the e file, and I'm going to bring my other rook over, and there's no way for the queen to defend d7, so I'm just going to have two pieces for a rook. And not only is that important because it's a good material advantage, but at the same time, it's highlighted in this particular scenario because I'm still doing the attack against the black king, and I'm gonna have the pair of bishops, working together with no rival, right? So this was another very nice idea because it also gets into the game the rook on a1 that hasn't been doing anything the whole game. So yeah, this is a very nice trick, rook to d1. My opponent didn't actually play knight to d7. He actually played c5, which again it's very curious because you just keep making moves with pawns, but at the same time I can't really judge what he's doing because the position is very tough, right? At least the knight is now going to try and develop to c6, and there's a stronger hold here on d4. However, that doesn't mean that the position is safe.
Rook takes.
Well, rook takes probably we can do, but after pawn takes, yeah, actually this might still work. Something like here.
F6 here.
Yeah, that is true. I don't know exactly why I didn't do it. I think I just maybe calculated.
The playing hall was very hot.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reason why. Yeah, so yeah, that's the thing, right? That if I do this, then I have to calculate, which means that I have to be sitting down on the board, and the playing room is hot. So I don't want to be doing that. I was just doing more intuitive moves. But yes, this idea works, especially if something like king h7, right? Because after takes, queen h4, and obviously, we're breaking through. The move that I played is also completely winning. I just thought it was a little bit simpler. I just played bishop to e5 right away. If the king moves either to g8 or h7, then I still have the idea of pawn takes, right? Breaking through. And if bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, the thing is that I had calculated this variation already. So I saw it pretty much all the way to the checkmate. So I just decided to go for it. The thing here is that we just traded off the bishops, but it doesn't mean that this king all of a sudden becomes safe, right? For example, if the king goes back to g8, then I have the very, very strong h6, f6, and then queen takes e7, right? And if the king goes to h7, then I'm going to have takes. If you take with the king, it's pretty much a massacre. Probably I can play king h1 even and win. Bishop to h5 is completely winning. Rook to d5 is probably winning. And then if you take with the pawn, then I do have queen takes e7, which again is completely winning. King g8, rook d6. So pretty much the only move to try and stay afloat is king to h6. But here I played queen to f4, g5, and then kind of the final blow in the position.
Oh, rook to d6.
Yeah, rook to d6, right? Just like breaking through completely. There is no proper way to reply to this move because if you play, for example, like f6, let's say, then there's queen g5, queen f5, right? And again, what can you possibly do in this position? If rook g8, then there's going to be takes. King h7, bishop to g4, and bishop to f5 is unstoppable. Again, kind of highlighting the lack of development, so I can afford to make a preparing move, right, without any defense. And basically, sometimes these moves are just intuitive because you just think, okay, like there's no way that my opponent has enough pieces to defend, or like there's no way that their pieces are arriving on time to defend. And all you need to do is confirm your intuition with calculation. And if you have been working on calculation, then you should be able to find it and solve it, right? So e takes d6 is what happened in the game. And here both queen takes d6 and queen f6 are working. I just played queen takes d6, but queen f6 is also possible. Because if king h7, then there is h6, queen d4, e5, and the position is not good at all. Something like rook g8, queen takes f7, king h8. And the thing is that I wasn't exactly sure how to win. I think something like this should be winning. But again, it's too much calculation for me, and then I was in a hot playing hall, so I don't want to calculate. So I just played queen takes d6, also attacking this rook. And after king g7, h6, king g8, queen f6, queen d4, and the very crucial e5. And after e5, there's nothing that black can do, right? And like I said, this is move 28, but I had seen the variation kind of since move 21 when I played bishop to e5. I managed to see this e5. I confirmed that there were no possible ways to defend. And my opponent ended up resigning in this position. Again, here in this final moments, we still see what the problem was, right? The problem that black had throughout the whole game, lack of development, right? Like if these pieces were somewhere else, if there was somehow a way to protect queen g7, then it would be a completely different scenario. But the only piece that's developed is the queen. You can see that even though I decided to play with g3, g4, my king is completely safe. There are no checks, and it is impossible to prevent a checkmate here on g7. So overall, I would say that this game kind of works as a good example of what happens if you don't take your opening principles seriously, right? And you don't end up developing your pieces properly, coordinating all of them, trying to put them in active squares. Maybe you know, also what happens if you waste time by moving pawns around, creating weaknesses around your own king, things like that. It all kind of comes back at the end, and this is a good example of that, right? But it doesn't only take the opponent making mistakes for us to win a game, right? We also have to be precise, and we have to do things like ensuring that all of our pieces that are involved into the game have a common weakness that we focus on attacking, right, from the opponent. Destabilizing the position, utilizing the fact that the opponent's pieces are uncoordinated for tactical threats and such. And at the end of the day, even if you're lazy, you need to do a little bit of calculation. So there are a lot of factors to take into account. And thankfully, here the game was sealed. So position is good. So if we don't have any questions about this game, I kind of want to move on to the next example. And the next example is from Morphy, who, as we know, is a player that always sees the moment, right? Maybe some of you know this position, maybe you don't. But even though it's not the exact same pawn structure or setup, if we just evaluate the position, we can see a few resemblance, you know, to the previous game, right? Here, white just played queen to a6, probably to you know, because they want to trade queens, but at the same time preventing the idea of queen takes f1, king takes, and rook to e1. Because if queen takes f1, then this queen can take, right? Queen takes f1. But at the same time, you have to consider the fact that the bishop on c1 has not been developed just yet. The rook on a2 is just there to be there. It doesn't necessarily have a role. And in fact, the fact that it's on a2 and not on a1 could mean that there are going to be some weaknesses in the first rank too. And the queen, once again, is on the complete opposite side of the board, right? Like, black is going to focus on attacking the white king, and the white queen is completely on the other side. Also, pair of bishops, right? One thing that we love a lot. At least I do. And anytime I teach chess, I hope that I can force other people to love bishops too. But this bishop on c1, it is clear that it has no actual future for the time being. So we need to find a way to utilize all of our pieces and actually have a breakthrough around the white king, since all of the pieces are on the other side of the board and then they're not going to be on time to defend, right? So black to move, what would you do? Or what would Morphy do? I guess that's the question.
You mean what did Morphy do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to say?
Give me 1 second. I'm seeing a lot of entries here. I do want to emphasize again that if queen takes f1, then queen takes f1, there is really no problem. Rook to e1 does get the queen back, but it's not really a great idea to trade queens, right? Because it lets white off the hook completely. Maybe you can play something like d4, and then this position is completely fine for white. Maybe they're slightly better. At the same time, if bishop takes f2, then there's just king takes f2, right? And there's no clear follow-up of what to do. Because you can play maybe rook d2 if you want to, but again, there's no clear idea, right? Like the king can just go back to g1, and it's not certain what to do after. So with that taken into account, the fact that black still needs to commit to a move quickly, right? Because there's a threat of a queen trade. The fact that the white pieces are on the other side of the board and that we are going to utilize our two bishops around the white king. What did Morphy do?
Queen takes bishop.
Yeah, queen takes f3, right? This is a very this is a very extreme case, right? But it's a very beautiful move, and it works here specifically again because the white pieces are on the other side of the board. They're not helping at all, and you might be even thinking that this rook on f1 somehow is going to protect the king, but the rook on f1 might also just be a liability because it prevents the king from running away, right? And the fact that all of the black pieces are now going to be completely involved into the attack just makes for the position to be better. Again, something that we have talked about before, but that I also want to emphasize today again, is the fact that even though the pieces have a preset value, they kind of earn their value throughout the game, right? So this queen might be worth 9 points, but in this particular position, I would say it's worth like 3 because it's on the complete opposite side of the board, not really doing anything. Once it gets back into the game, then it becomes a good piece again. But right now, in this particular moment, if we keep making threats as black, then this queen won't have time to get back into the game. And this is not me telling you that you should all sacrifice your queen during a game just to see what happens. But, it's an effective way to break through the opponent's king, right? And then open up the position a little bit so the rest of our pieces can attack. So have that idea in mind when you play your own games. It's more about the idea itself rather than the specific move. But okay, so queen takes f3, actually Morphy thought 12 minutes in this move. And after takes, rook g6 is the idea, king to h1, and we're going to bring our bishop over, right? Bishop to h3. And the bishop is going to come to g2. There are going to be a bunch of discovered checks. And at the same time, something like rook to g1 is obviously not possible because takes, and rook to e1, right? So, like I said, bishop to g2 is coming. So bishop g2, bishop f3, so this rook needs to get out of the way. Rook to d1. But now, after bishop g2, king to g1, bishop takes f3, king f1. How did black continue?
Well, wait a minute. Can you back up a moment? A moment, what about, before then?
Here?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
What about bishop takes f2?
Bishop takes f2, I think it's fine. The thing is that white can't really escape from the threat of the two bishops, right? So yeah, bishop takes f2 is probably completely winning because bishop g2 is coming, and the only way to defend would be queen to f1.
Oh, that's right, it does have queen to f1.
Yeah, queen to f1. So that is going to be the only way to defend. But the thing is that we can always go back to this moment, right? Because after bishop g2, king f1, king g1, we're going to take on f3 first, right? And like we said, the king doesn't really have any way to escape. The king went to f1. And here bishop to g2 was played. There was another idea, which I have seen a lot, is rook to g2. Then there is really no way to defend. Let's say something like d4, right, to protect here. Rook takes h2, and there's no way to prevent rook to h1. So rook g2 was possible. Bishop g2 is what was played in the game, which again is also completely winning. King to g1, bishop to h3, and bishop takes f2. And overall, the point is that now you just get to the same position, but you manage to take the pawn on f3, right? And then it was very simple. After queen to f1, takes. Position was lost soon after rook to e2. Very strong, not even allowing, white to do anything that has to do with development or getting their pieces into the game. Rook to a1, and finally rook to h6, right? And there's nothing that you can do because after d4, bishop to e5, bishop to e3, and then rook takes h2, and rook g2 is coming. So, like if bishop decides to take, then rook takes h2, and rook g2 is coming. So these two examples kind of work as a way to just highlight what happens if, on one hand, you don't end up getting your pieces into the game and developing, and what you should do when you realize that your opponent is not doing so during the game, right? Like I said, it kind of has to do with the fact that not only the opponent has to make a mistake for you to win the game, but at the same time you also need to find a way to break through the position and utilize those weaknesses that they have created, right? So in the previous example, the move for that would have been g4, just breaking open the king side. And then in this game, it would have been queen takes f3, right? So developing the pieces is very important. And at the same time, I don't want to emphasize these specific moves themselves. Those do work as ideas because, for example, again, in the previous game, h5 was the typical hook, I guess, that white would use to start an attack. So that is a good idea to know. Have some sort of hook in the position to open up the king side. But again, more than these specific moves themselves, like queen takes f3 here, I just want to emphasize the idea of breaking open the opponent's king somehow. Maybe not in every case you're going to be able to sacrifice a queen. Maybe it's a mistake and you're actually blundering your queen. But, at least somehow manage to break through the position. So yeah, with that, I think we're going to be ending for today. I think these two examples did a good job at highlighting this idea. There are a lot more very interesting examples that you can find, especially from the romantic time of chess, or like that style of like sacrificing a lot of pieces to finally reach the opponent's king. And yeah, with that, like I said, we're going to be ending for today. I'm going to be teaching next week as well. And we're ending the stream. I'll see you all next time. Bye. Thank you.